We are live. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I am joined by a special guest. He's the president of MIF. He's also a disabilities and cannabis advocate and peer counselor and power wheelchair guru. Please give it up for Mr. Thomas Queter.
I forgot I had that in my bio, guru.
I like the guru. You know, and do you happen to have a ponytail?
No ponytail, no yoga. I don't bend well.
There you there you go. And Thomas, I think I first came across you a while back because you had this meme where you said, "I run better than the government." And so maybe you could explain why that's such a great meme to the audience, those who might not be familiar with it.
Okay, so that slogan's actually not original to me.
Okay.
Somebody had a brilliant and very libertarian idea, based, I assume, on their understanding of welfare. They marketed a shirt to people in wheelchairs that said, "I run better than government," and it's still out there. It's still being sold. Um, and I saw that, and as a libertarian, I of course had to say that and post a picture of myself, and I do qualify the statement for myself. I run better than the government because, unlike most government programs, I can manage a step and a dive, and that's at least one step better.
There we go. And how so you're in New York, you're upstate, is that how you would describe it? Or
I would describe it as central. New York is weird. If you're below I 90, everybody above I 90 calls you a downstater. And if you're above Westchester, everybody below Westchester calls you an upstater. And the Western New York people are really angry because they're not upstate or downstate, and they want to be called Western New York. And it's kind of strange, the dynamic there. We're all
yeah.
trying to separate each other.
Yeah, I'm from Queens originally. So I'm from Queens. I went to NYU and I lived in Brooklyn for a while. So I'm the city folk. And what's the relationship like? Like how do you guys view us Southerners?
Well, first of all, don't ever lump me into any kind of "you guys" kind of statement.
Uh-huh.
I
How
don't
does
usually go with the crowd.
yeah.
But I can speak to the general sentiment, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
can speak to my own perspective. I actually spent a few weeks in Queens last year, um, and I have a
I
funny story about that when we
yeah,
get.
I hope it was by choice. I hope you weren't forced to be somewhere you didn't want to be.
We were petitioning for statewide office, and I was on the ballot, or I was on the, um, yeah, the sheet of 5 statewide candidates. What do they call that? Why is that slipping?
Uh,
It's because I'm live.
there you go.
So I was down there for petitioning, but back to the upstate downstate thing. Um, I feel that it's mired in misnomers or misunderstandings. A lot of upstaters blame New York City and the people from there for all of our problems because taxes and the way the government works. And I understand why, because, well, politically, New York City and Albany seem to have all the power in the state for the most part. And that's where that comes from. But the people downstate, they're not really, they shouldn't be wrapped up in that. One thing I do know about the differences between down there and up here is that we elect a lot of our local positions like school board. And in the city, they're mostly appointed. A lot of
Yeah.
the lower level people that we elect up here, you guys don't in the city don't have a choice, right? And it's no wonder that freedoms are less there when you're not voting on representatives. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's like the people the people that you guys elect obviously have to answer to you. Meanwhile, it's sort of like, who's going to get the next appointment, down in New York. And yeah, so I'm from Queens originally, so I was a lifelong New Yorker until a couple of years ago where I made the move to Jersey. And where we are today, I might as well be in New York because this Canadian wildfire is just blanketing the sky, darkening the sky, and just messing everything up. Right now, I didn't realize it, but earlier today when I was walking around, like my eyes were all teary, and now I'm all like congested. So I hope I can make it through this. Meanwhile, you were smoking a cigarette before, so I think you're doing
Yeah,
fine.
I'm one of those people, right? I still smoke. I've tried to quit, but nothing works.
No, nothing works.
Chantix gave me terrible nightmares and slight psychological disturbance, so I got off of that real quick.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and cold turkey doesn't work because, well, I'm addicted to nicotine. And
Hmm.
there's actually a genetic variance in the human population that something like 40% of us, it's almost impossible to quit a nicotine addiction once you start.
So what? Did you try the patch? Did you try that?
Um, so I tried the gum. I'm not real big on patches because you get one manufacturing um, issue and they don't really release. We saw this in fentanyl, right? They over release sometimes.
Oh
And
wow.
it's just not something I trust personally. Everybody's welcome to make their own choices, but I did try the nicotine gum, and I don't know if you know this, Lou, but nicotine is heavily addictive.
Yes. How much gum were you were you
Right.
chewing?
I was chewing too much gum. Um, I tried the vaporless nicotine inhalers.
Uh-huh.
I forget what they call them. Nicotrol box is right over there. Um, that helps, but I still haven't really been able to get away from it. And any nicotine replacement just doesn't feel like tobacco, if that makes
Uh-huh.
any sense. So often people like myself end up smoking on top of their nicotine replacement.
Is it sort of like how people want to make fake meat, like lab grown meat, and it's just not taking off? Like people are like, no, like I need that feel of of the meat. I need like the textures and all that.
Yeah, maybe. I'm really not a fan of lab grown meat as a concept.
I've never tried it. Yeah, I've never tried it.
I haven't tried it, but I understand nature, and I understand that our science is not there to make it as nutritionally viable as nature does.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the like the genetic component to smoking because both of my parents smoked, and I think my mom's probably she probably quit like probably over 10 years ago, maybe a little more. And my dad quit before she did. But growing up, I remember I have two younger brothers. They had to be like maybe like 4 or 5 years old, and I'm like a year older. And my mom left a cigarette in an ashtray, and my younger brother Mark hopped up onto the counter, picked it up, and puffed on it like yeah, you know, like the footage you see of like of chimpanzees smoking. He was like a little monkey smoking, and he went on, to become a very successful smoker. He's been off for a little bit, but, it's like, "Oh, well, there he was. He's little this little kid smoking cigarettes like it was nothing."
Well, and smoking is an interesting addiction because it kills some people, but not all. I can't tell you how many little old farmers I've known who worked every day of their life into their 90s to the day they died, smoked like a chimney, and had beer every day. Um, Personally, I can't drink. I quit many years ago, and alcohol is not the drug for me. Um, but it is interesting because you see some people they'll develop issues right away, some people later in life, some people not at all.
Yeah, it is wild when you see, like, these old timers and you're like, they're just built differently. My family has a butcher shop. It's funny, we're talking about lab grown meat. And my dad would have a number of customers who were like, Puerto Ricans in their 90s, and they would come in and they get bacon and a pack of cigarettes from the bodega down the street, and that's basically what they're eating, and they're all there, they're fine, they're still walking around and all that. It is wild how that works.
Interestingly, bacon fat is one of the healthiest fats you can cook with.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Low in cholesterol and no what is it? No trans fats, obviously.
Well, look at that. This just turned into the health spot for everybody out there. If you're looking to offset your smoking, get some bacon fat in there.
Absolutely. Actually, I did take some steps to change my smoking habit. I used to smoke 4 packs of Marlboros a day.
4 packs. How
Yes,
many how many cigarettes is that if you count it out?
80,
80?
80.
Dude.
So there's an interesting episode of How It's Made. Are you familiar with the show?
No, no, I explain.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's an old they're still going, but it's an old show, and they take you into a factory and they show you how stuff is made. Sometimes they're making skateboards, sometimes they're making widgets, right? Whatever it is, and they just show you the process behind the scenes of how things are manufactured and made. And one of their earlier episodes, probably late 80s, early 90s, they went into a tobacco factory. And they showed you that they take all of the expired cigarettes, all of the waste material from the tobacco plant when they're making cigarettes, literally shoveling it off the floor, and they soak it in solvents. That's to extract the nicotine. And then they spray that onto the tobacco to make fresh cigarettes. And that's because they're trying to get that nicotine level to that sweet spot between heavy addiction and poison. A lot of people forget nicotine used to be a black widow drug. You could extract it and slip it into someone's food and they die.
Wait, how much I never knew about that. Ho So there were, like, cases of people being murdered with nicotine?
Oh, yeah, in the 1800s, absolutely. You can do the same thing with apple seeds to extract arsenic.
Now, this show just went from, health info to if you wanna commit murder and possibly get away with it? I don't know.
So back to how I curbed my smoking.
Yeah,
Uh,
bro, let's go back there.
so in New York, you're probably aware the price of cigarettes through the 90s and on just went
Crazy.
up and up and up.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started rolling my own cigarettes, buying a can of tobacco and the tubes and all of that. Um, Now I just hand roll and I actually use organic tobacco with no additives, which means the solvents full of extra nicotine aren't in there. Now, the tobacco industry actually spent billions of dollars to figure out how much they could max that nicotine out before they were killing their customers.
So would it be, so is there a where customers were, say, dying from nicotine poisoning before they were getting, like, lung cancer?
No, they never, to my knowledge, had people die of nicotine poisoning from smoking cigarettes. But what they were looking for is the heaviest addiction possible before killing you, so that you're smoking the most cigarettes, which turns over their product more quickly.
Wow, so okay, so now you're hand rolling organic cigarettes, which kinda makes you, I guess, like a hipster, in a way.
Or a
Uh,
hillbilly.
oh, hillbilly hipster.
Um,
Um, yeah, I
yeah,
wanna, if
it, it,
you
it's interesting. I smoke less than a pack worth of tobacco a day now. Um, it's organic. My lungs cleared up when I made the switch because there's some 230 plus chemicals that they add to those packed cigarettes when you buy them. FDA approved, by the way.
yeah. So, yeah, and how do you feel overall? Like, what do you remember what it was like when you like, how did you feel when you were smoking 80 a day versus what do you what are you down to now, for your own pre-rolled? What rolls do
Um,
you roll?
it probably amounts to about a half a pack of cigarettes worth of tobacco, but maybe 30 total cigarettes because I roll them much thinner. No filters, by the way, so no microplastics. I am not inhaling cancer-causing microplastics with my cigarettes anymore.
Wow. This is so
So,
this is so interesting because I've never heard this side before. I grew up very much in the, all smoke, like, being very much against smoking. All smoking is bad. I used to sabotage my mother's smoking I used to take her cigarette boxes of cigarettes, packs of cigarettes, excuse me, out of her purse, run them under the faucet, and then put them back. And she used to get so pissed, as as you'd expect. But I'm like, but I love you. I want you to live. But yeah, I wonder, have there been any big, like, studies or meta studies on people who smoke, like, say, the stuff that you're smoking versus the corporate cigarettes?
I would say it's very unlikely that any successful studies that have been shown to everyone exist, um, because they're going to do everything they can to not show that. They want that money. They want that turnover of product. You know, your local heroin dealer is much the same. They
Mhm.
want you to keep coming back.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and so, I wonder, how does this, because you're also a disabilities and cannabis advocate, and cannabis, I guess, nowadays is sort of notorious for being so much stronger than it used to be, say, 30, 40 years ago. Um, is there a similar thing happening with cannabis that happened with cigarettes? Although I don't know.
I would just say we're doing a better job of growing it because it's not illegal.
Uh-huh.
So, as a cannabis advocate, I would advise that if you're a first time user, start with CBD. Just go there, get a CBD gummy or tincture or something, and start there. And then work your way up on the scale of THC if you're going to go that way. Um, and when I was a teenager, and this is going to sound bad at first, so hear me out. there was this there was this thing that people did called banging. Not what it sounds like. To bang somebody is to give them the most potent cannabis you can find for their first time smoking cannabis.
Oh man.
And you'll hear bad stories about that, right? And it turns people off cannabis because they're not used to it. It's just like any other medicine. You get used to it. You build
Right.
up a tolerance, just like opiates when you're prescribed. Um, which interestingly is why I became a cannabis user. Um, I think I was 11, so 1994, when my orthopedic surgeon pulled me aside when everybody else was out of the room, and he said, these painkillers, they're no good for you. You should go try some marijuana, right? So think about this. My doctor was telling a severely disabled child to go score some street drugs.
Was his name Dr. Feelgood? Is that
Dr. Carpenter, actually. I did end up leaving him over a different incident, but he served me mostly well throughout my childhood.
mhm. And what were you diagnosed with as a child where you were seeing this guy?
Okay, so when we were talking before the show in text, you said you wanted to know how I came to libertarianism.
Mhm.
For libertarianism, I was born to it. My parents were not libertarians, but we were libertarians, right? And so we have to go back before I was born to really explain this.
Yeah, I'm happy to go back there. Sure.
After my brother was born, my mother had an IUD infection and was told she couldn't have children anymore. And they were poor, hardworking farm hands, skin and bone, underfed people, right? And she goes to the doctor because she thinks she has the flu. The doctor tells her she's 4 months pregnant. She refuses to believe him, from what I'm told. And then I would end up being born 6 weeks late.
6 weeks late.
As someone with a form of dwarfism, as a baby, I was a bigger baby than my brother, who is now 6'3".
Huh.
And I was born a breech.
Wow.
So she went into labor because she sneezed and fell, and the skin on her stomach split open. I know
Oh,
this because she spent my childhood reminding me what she went through.
oh my God.
Right? So I'm born, and my condition is one that is rarely diagnosed immediately. I was lucky in this hole in the wall hospital in the middle of upstate New York where you can barely find good health care at that time, 1983. Somebody who was there, I believe he was a nurse, did his residency at the OI clinic, I believe at NYU. And he was able to diagnose me. Now, here's the thing. In 1983, and it's different now because they've changed the definitions, but in 1983, there were four main types of osteogenesis imperfecta. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Type 1 and 4 basically were the milder forms for the most part. It was largely diagnosed on physical characteristics. Type 3 at that time was supposedly the worst type you could live with. And type 2 was defined by miscarriage or infant mortality, right? Not going to live. I was diagnosed as a type 2. They were going to just leave me to die because I had that type 2 diagnosis. My mother, who just went through a natural birth breech, right, from a large baby that came out, and here's another reason why I'm a libertarian, butt first, right? I was born mooning the world. She had the sense and the wherewithal through all of the drugs that they gave her through a birth like that to fight for my life and have me moved to a better hospital, Wilson General Hospital down in Binghamton. And they weren't going to let her go with me, but at that time there was less restrictions they could put on you. And so they told her, if you can stand up and walk out of here to the vehicle and go, we'll let you go. So now this woman had been split, right, in so many ways and gone through 10 and a half months of gestation and was full of God knows what drugs. And she stood up out of that bed, walked out of the hospital, and stepped up into my grandfather's rather high pickup to go with me. On 2 occasions through the first year or 2 of my birth, she would have to defend my life against CPS, Child Protective Services. And later, as a disabilities advocate, I would come to understand why. The diagnosis doesn't always make its way to the CPS officer or representative, like the social worker. And you bring your infant in with broken bones, which is the #1 symptom of my condition. And the first thing the hospital does is call CPS. Right? Because here's an infant with his arms and legs broken. Right? I mean, it's very natural to think that there must have been some kind of abuse. But what typically happens in those situations is, diagnosed or not, CPS takes the child. And again, I'm talking about the 80s more than today, but it still happens. And maybe that child gets diagnosed soon after the CPS. Maybe he was diagnosed before. But in either case, I have talked to many, many parents of kids with my condition who waited 18 years to meet their child.
Oh, my God.
Because CPS took them. And that's if they're lucky enough that the child survived that system, because that's a system full of people who often are overworked and overwhelmed and don't have time to read your medical charts. Right? I mean, I had a nurse break my legs as a baby once because she didn't read the chart before she changed my diaper.
Huh.
I had over 1,000 fractures by the time I was 16. My fracture rate was over 100 a year. and here's a tip for anybody out there. If you have a small disabled child and you give him cannabis, within 2 years, he will defy a wing of the federal government to save his own life, as I did. I started using cannabis at the age of 13. And at the age of 15, I was given the internet. And I found about this wonderful family of drugs known as bisphosphonates. They're used to treat low bone density situations. They've been used for Paget's and cancer patients and osteoporosis since the 70s. But in 1998, it was not allowed by the FDA for a genetic condition whose primary symptom was low bone density. Think about that for a minute. And we didn't have the option to just get that. I couldn't talk to my doctor, and my doctor saying, well, we should try this. We can now because of the right to try, but in 1998, that wasn't a thing. So how did I defy the FDA that tells us that avocados will kill you, coconut oil will kill you, but that Pop-Tart every morning, that's a healthy breakfast. I actually, believe it or not, I had to go through Canada. I, on my own, my parents were working far too hard to really do the legwork here. I researched, I found a doctor, I found the study, and I started receiving that treatment when I was 16. When I started receiving the treatment, they told me it could take a year or two to see improvement. 2 weeks after my first treatment was the first time in my life that I just sat straight up in bed without propping with my arms.
Wow.
I went from a fracture rate of over 100 down to a fracture rate of less than 1 per year. And the federal government was saying I couldn't have that at one time. But there were enough of us like me doing that. And the study had great results. And now, if you have osteogenesis imperfecta, you can get this drug or one of many drugs in this family. I get pamidronate, which is kind of one of the stronger forms of bisphosphonate. I get one of the higher doses. Despite being a, quote, little person, which is a PC term I can't stand. Well, I weigh 250 pounds, Lou. My shoulders are 2 feet wide. They're wider than Kane.
250? You weigh 250?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my chest is 52 inches around.
Holy sh! I'm 40. What am I? 42. So you got 10 inches.
And I'm under 4 foot tall.
Wow.
So part of that's family genetics. There's a lot of large people in my family.
Yeah, you said your brother's what, 6'3". I mean, that's a big farm boy. You got
well, he's a contractor. He has his own contracting business now. Doing well. 3 daughters. So I am, how do I put this? The best way to define my personality, Lou, I was 4.5 years old when I got my first power wheelchair. I've never been able to stand up or take a step, but I was 3.5 years old the first time I ran away from home. I made it 3 yards in rural New York away. You know, it's like, let's see, 3 yards in this town is probably somewhere between 300 and 500 yards of measurement, right?
Yeah.
As a 15 to 20 pound kid scooting on his butt. And I remember why I did that. I wasn't running away from something that was bothering me. I wasn't emotionally disturbed. I wasn't upset about anything. I often played in the dirt driveway that we have. Mm-hmm. And at the edge of the driveway to the next property, there's a steep slope, maybe 2 feet tall, but almost vertical, right? And I was told not to go down that slope. It was dangerous. They said, Tom, you can't do that. That's a mistake, Lou. Don't tell me I can't do something. Because I sat there for days playing, thinking, I bet I could do that. Pretty sure I could figure out a way to get down there pretty safely. And I did. And then it's like, well, I can really try hard to get back up that slope, or I can keep going. And as libertarians, we believe in the right to, move around. So I kept going.
Thomas, like, hearing the story, from one, I mean, I don't know if you've written a screenplay yet or a memoir, but you need to do that. I think the story you have is incredible. And also, I'm just thinking about that little kid having gone through like you said, like hundreds of broken bones and fractures and all that. I mean, my God, the amount of people who would just quit naturally just because, their body wouldn't be able to sustain it, or the fear there. And yet you push through that. I think that's amazing, man.
Well, if you want to live, you have to shed your fear. I don't care who you are. If you want to survive, thrive, move forward, exist, continue on, whatever it is you're looking to do in life, you need tenacity. You need to go after it. You need to be unafraid and unapologetic. I grew up learning how to fight insurance companies, learning how to fight local and state school systems, um, and of course the FDA. Every time I turn around, some purportedly benevolent government program or concept is trying to detriment me. Uh, Restrictions on welfare, right? I mean, we talk about disability welfare. I'm on disability welfare right now. I have a goal of being off of it by 2025. I don't want to die on this shit. Sorry for swearing, but
No,
I turned 18 in June of 2001, and that July SSI check was the first welfare check that was mine to manage. And I remember going to the post office, getting the mail, looking at that check, and thinking, I know all of the restrictions to my life that come with this. I know that this means I will never be successful. This means I could end up in a state institution. I could end up in a place that's terrible and full of abuse. I could end up in all manners of tragedy that I probably don't want to disturb your viewers with. Um, and I thought to myself, yeah, I got to find a way. I got to find a way to get off of this. That was my own prerogative because I understood the restrictions. That's why I went to college. The other reason I went to college is that the state lied to me. They told me that I would be covered under funding because of my disability. That didn't turn out to be true. After my first year, I came out of an architectural major, $9,000 in debt, and as an extremely poor person, a $9,000 in 2001 or 2002 was a big deal. It took me many years to get out from under that. I was also told I was going to a state school, Alfred State. At that time, it had one of the best architecture programs in the country. It had a reputation for that as well. And I was told that they would make curriculum adjustments for my disability. I don't know how much you know about architecture or going through school, but at that time, despite the emergence of AutoCAD, which is what got me into college, um, you still had to go through 2 years of manual drafting, right? And some of the sizes of the projects are bigger than me. and standing up, bending over, and reaching, not really in my wheelhouse of talents. And so the curriculum classes I started failing, the ones I liked, the ones that I was interested in, because I couldn't do the projects. And you can only go to an office and ask for help so many times before. Yeah. It was very obvious that I wasn't going to get what I needed. That they did the smile and nod and promise to get you there and get that money. And I actually came out of 1 year of college as a severe alcoholic.
Jesus.
Well, they made another bright decision, right? This guy, he's disabled. He needs to be with responsible people. We'll put him in the 24 years old and up wing of the dorm. Do you know who populates that wing of the dorm in state colleges?
It sounds like Canadian hockey players.
Ex-military.
Ex-military. Okay, I was off by a
Do
hair.
not learn to drink straight whiskey with the military. That's a bad idea. But they were great guys. We had a lot of fun. But I was in a way, I was 4.5 hours away from home, constantly under what seemed like a threat to me of being put out on the street, right? They told me, you have to leave. It's not here. They didn't really say it in a explanatory, nice way for an 18-year-old who's on his own for the first time and severely disabled. My thoughts every time I got a phone call from the financial aid office was, I'm going to be 4.5 hours away from home on the street in a Western New York winter, and my parents can't just drop everything and come get me. They didn't have that ability in life. They worked. So I signed off on those personal loans for my education every time they asked. Man, I ended up deep. I ended up depressed. I ended up an alcoholic. I ended up coming home and quitting alcohol for the first time. I've been quit many times in the next 15 or so years. Um, have you ever quit drinking a liter plus of straight liquor a day, cold turkey?
I never drank that much
I did.
straight liquor.
By
You
the
know,
time I got out of that first year of college, I was drinking a liter of Absolute a day to keep my hands steady.
what impact did that have on your condition? Like, did that have any effect on like your bone density? Is that
That's to be seen or known.
Mm.
I was still getting those treatments, and my bone density was still climbing. Um, and I mean, it can't be good for you. It's alcohol. It's the only inebriant known to man that's toxic to every cell of your body.
Mm.
Um, so I can't say it didn't detriment my condition, but I can't say it was noticeably so. But quitting liquor and a habit like that on your own is probably not something anyone should do. Here's the thing, though. My condition is very severe, and the severity of my condition makes my situation much more rare than even when people have an understanding of osteogenesis imperfecta. I am at the farthest end of that spectrum, which it is a spectrum. Some people have osteogenesis imperfecta and never know it.
Mm.
It's one of many genetic mutations that affect collagen type 1, which affects the structure of your bones, skin, and organs. So, I can't say it affected my health in a noticeable way as far as my bones, but it definitely affected my mental health a lot.
Oh
And
yeah.
and quitting cold turkey without assistance was rough. So you got to understand. Just like the talking about CPS earlier, I understood that going into a rehab facility for alcohol was not a good idea for me. I would
W-
likely be mishandled, broken, hurt, potentially
Mm.
killed.
Mm.
So, yeah.
And so at the time you had a motorized wheelchair.
Since I
Did you
was
ever
four
get,
and a half.
did you ever get pulled over for
Yes,
drinking under the influence while
twice,
operating that?
twice. Um, so once was actually in college. Um, Interestingly, if you get stopped by the state troopers and you're very disabled and they're going to search you for contraband or whatever it is they want to do, just slur and tell them you're incontinent. They leave you alone. The second time, it wasn't really a big deal. Um, Pulled over. The police officer was actually already sitting on the side of the road, parked, and I was coming down the side of the road because the sidewalks here are garbage. Um, and I had been drinking, and he turns his high beams on, right? And so of course I slow down because I can't see, and I'm trying to figure out where I am and make sure I'm safe, not in the road. And he uses that as an excuse to get out and see if I'm inebriated. Well, yeah, but I told him, you just blinded me with your lights. That's why I, got off the road.
Yeah. And
It's
what
interesting.
did you get out of it or
Oh, yeah, he didn't give me a ticket. I mean, it's Shenango County, man. You really gotta be, um, you gotta be doing something stupid or bad or violent to get a ticket or get arrested. I mean, the troopers are always hot on traffic tickets, but that's New York. As far as Well, I have seen so many instances where people had illegal backyard fireworks. And when somebody called the cops come and make sure you're doing it safely, and then they stand back and watch.
and I imagine like I mean you're probably well known up there, right? Like they know who Thomas is.
Well, they definitely know that I'm not going to hold back on my opinions.
You're not going where? I'm sorry. What was that again?
That I'm not going to hold back on my opinions.
All right.
Some people love it. Some people hate it. Don't know. Don't care. I'm a libertarian. People think I'm okay. Well, here's an instance. There was a local couple who adopted a child. They were poor. Um, it was through the CPS system. Now, here's the thing: when you're a child in the CPS system, you know what kind of choices you have.
Oh God. Yeah.
Yeah, vanilla or chocolate pudding. That's about it. Now, the systems placed a deaf, physically disabled, cognitively disabled child with a couple who lived in a trailer that had no ramp and they didn't speak sign language. And this was at a time when they could promise all kinds of assistance for disabilities, and it was very attractive. We'll help you with this. You can do this because we'll provide you with the services you need. And it was actually at the time that started ramping down. That New York has been cutting services for the disabled since at least the late 90s and early O's. So now you have this poor family who adopted because they couldn't have children. And they're not, I don't like to disparage them, but they didn't have college degrees, right? Um, they
Well,
weren't fit to handle the situation, is more appropriate to say.
yeah, yeah. I mean, as you describe it, I mean, at the very minimum, it's like having a ramp, like being able to communicate with this child who has been through so much. You could, man.
Yeah. So they did end up getting a natural baby. She got pregnant. And then the trailer burnt down with him in it. Um,
Oh my God.
yeah, it's a very disturbing situation.
How old was the child?
Early teens, I think.
Mm.
So the truth is not known about this situation at all. Um, what I can ascertain is she got pregnant and probably didn't want the burden anymore, right? Because when the state promised all that help and it didn't come through, it became a very dragging thing in life. My own situation has dragged on the lives of those around me. I can see it. It's stress, right? As a kid, I always felt worse for my parents and those around me because they had to deal with that. They had to watch their child suffer in a way that most people can't even imagine. And it's believed that he was overfed his medications, potentially presumed dead, and then they burnt the trailer down with him in it. Now, yes, to murder someone like that is bad, and yes, you are a criminal, or however you want to look at it. And no argument from me there. They did something wrong. They have responsibility. Um, but I was advocating for the fact that CPS had responsibility.
Mm.
State systems had responsibility. They took that child, whether it was given or they took it away, or whatever it was, and then they placed that child. And they placed that child very deliberately in a place. Well, they didn't probably deliberately choose a place that was bad for him, but they very deliberately placed him. And here we are, right? Here's the end result. The other thing is CPS have been called several times because of the situation with him, and they didn't do anything. So who are they looking out for? And how did that help? Right? They went from one life in a bad position to now three. Now here's the interesting thing. I grew up with that guy. He's my age. They're in the same grade. And he was one of the few that whenever there was anything disability related that someone might think I needed to be defended for, he was one of the people that did that. He stood up for me and others. And so to think that he would just have malicious intent in his heart, to me, is wrong. I don't think that's it. I think he was in a shit spot, and I think he made a bad decision. And while She absolutely, and she should too. She got off because she was pregnant. While
So,
they
so,
should absolutely suffer consequences, don't you think maybe we should look at these systems too?
just to be clear, so the adopted the father who adopted the child, you knew him.
I grew up with him.
You grew up with him,
I,
not with the
I
child.
talk to his mother every time I see her outside. She lives right up the road, and it's interesting because when I was trying to advocate for the fact that we need to look at these systems and how they function and why this whole situation came to be, I got called a murderer defender because as a disability advocate and someone who is disabled, obviously I think it's okay to murder disabled people. What? Um, and that was a very interesting situation because I mean you have to think all of these people are defending CPS in the state. When CPS placed them, the state placed them. They didn't do their job when they were called about problems. How are we supposed to not look at that? How did people just put on the blinders and say, "Oh well, the government did it. It's okay." Twice in my early life, my mother had to defend my life against social workers, CPS. At one time, there's a story she threatened to cut their heart out because they were going to take me, right? And she knew my situation. She knew my disability. She knew that if a stranger handled me, my bones were going to get broken. When I started this treatment that I told you about a little bit ago, they did a bone density scan, a DEXA scan, right? And my bone density came back at a -9. Which
Negative.
one?
Yeah. What's the range?
That's what I'm getting at. The
Yeah.
normal range is -2 to 2. My orthopedic surgeon at that time said that it was the lowest bone density he had ever seen in anyone for anything. Now I'm in normal range between -2 and 2.
Mhm.
Um,
And and with that, when you talk about bone density, in my mind, I don't know how it is with people who are listening to this, but I think just arms and legs. But we're talking about your whole body. You're talking about your whole skeleton. You're talking about your cranium. We're talking about your rib cage. We're talking about your whole body. And so it's like if a bone breaks in a rib, and that has severe impact on your breathing, on your cardiovascular system, all that.
well, I do have large and powerful lungs, so that's always helped. I actually made it through a 3-day political convention in Florida with all of the ribs on my right side broken, setting up, doing the political thing, shaking hands.
Jesus.
Well, it sounds extreme, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yes, Thomas. Yeah, the way that you tell that story, describe it. Yeah, it sounds a little extreme.
well, it sounds extreme to you
Right.
because you haven't experienced it, right? Remember, I had over 1,000 fractures.
Because I'm a pussy. Because I'm a
Well,
pussy. If I break a nail, I'm not shaking anybody's hand, Thomas.
so you're familiar with the frog in boiling water analogy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If you drop the frog into boiling water, it hops out. If you put it in and you just bring it up to a boil, it doesn't. Well, I'm the frog that survived being boiled because it, the way to relate this is that I was born with over 25 fractures. I went on to have fracture after fracture after fracture after fracture. I just healed a broken rib and a broken finger in the last month. Um, I am very, very used, much like a fish is used to swimming, to having broken bones. I'm used to feeling that pain. Um, Pain when you are overly familiar with it, which let's hope you aren't. Um, it is just another sensation if you think about it appropriately. Fortunately, I was taught to meditate from the age of 2 or 3. I can block pain mentally. I can control the way I perceive and react to pain. And to that note, I have actually been in a situation, room full of people, did something that broke my femur. Everybody knows my situation. They hear that noise. They know what it is. And I'm the only guy that's calm because I've dealt with it before.
Mm.
Right? I mean, when you run into Raccoon. You know what a raccoon is? You've seen them before. It doesn't seem that abnormal, does it? But if you're walking around Jersey and you run into a hippopotamus, that's going to be a surprise, right? To me, the broken bones of the raccoon, not the hippopotamus.
Well, my family, we were out for a walk a few weeks back, and my wife and my oldest son ran into a raccoon in the kind of the storm drain, and raccoon scared the shit out of her. So now my son, who's 3 years old, he says every time we walk by, we say leave the raccoon alone, and we'll just go about it.
While we're on the subject of raccoons, I told you I had a funny story about my time in Queens.
My God, if it involves a raccoon, all right, I'm here for it.
Okay, so I don't sleep much. I like to work 16 to 20 hours a day. My early childhood was on a dairy farm, right? So you get up early, you go to bed late. And that's just in my nature and my pattern. If I get more than 6 hours of sleep, I don't really feel good. So it's 2 a.m., Queens Boulevard, and I come outside to the corner out of my hotel to have a cigarette. And one of the few times of night that it's actually dead, no cars moving, no people walking. I'm on the corner. This raccoon comes trotting down the center of the road, right? He gives me a double take, like I'm the one that's not supposed to be there. I was a surprise to the raccoon. I was actually very surprised to see how much wildlife is down there.
Yeah, well, Queens is the most diverse place on earth. So there's going to be a big population of, you have everything. You have the Irish, you have Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, raccoons,
Stray cats.
Stray cats. Brian Seltzer, from Long Island, his thing. Something I want to talk about, with New York, and just thinking about it, you as being disabled and also an advocate. uh for decades, I would take the subway, and it wasn't until I had kids and my wife and I took a trip into the city with our kids in this big stroller that we realized how hard it is to get around the subway system if you're in a wheelchair. Like, you would think, New York, this, progressive city, human rights, all about it. And meanwhile, it's very well, like in some places, impossible if you're in a wheelchair to fucking get on the subway.
Sometimes it's impossible to go down the sidewalk unless you have a wheelchair like mine that's no longer manufactured and you're not allowed to have.
What do you have? What do you have? A V8 in your wheelchair?
Well, it was originally called an Omega Track. That's another interesting story. We need like 20 more minutes to talk about it. It's no longer made. It's no longer approved to the systems. I fought 2 years to get approval. As soon as I got approval, the line was no longer made because they weren't selling it because it couldn't get approved. So, back to the city. I told you I spent like 3 weeks there. Do you know how many power wheelchairs I saw out and about when I was on the sidewalks petitioning the whole time? 2. 15% of the population is disabled. Significant number of those use wheelchairs.
Yeah.
I only saw 2, and I know why. My chair will push start an F-150. It'll climb a 6-inch curb. You probably saw the video I posted yesterday on my Twitter where I climbed the mountainous hill behind my house. And most of these wheelchairs today have become throwaway products. They're cheap, they're chintzy, they're over advertised. It's like a Burger King commercial. You see that commercial, and it's a big, juicy, beautiful patty. The vegetables look healthy. Every sesame seed is perfectly placed, and it just looks delicious. And then you go through the drive-through, and what do you get when you come out the other side? A flat, greasy, flavorless patty, right? I once saw a wheelchair advertisement. I believe it was one of the Quantum line. They had this rugged looking guy with this huge chain over his shoulder attached to a semi, like he was towing it. And that's complete BS, right? That's just complete BS. But my wheelchair actually has 1.5 horsepower. It can push start an F-150. It can climb a 6-inch curb. It doesn't get stuck very easily. It true tracks if you drive at an angle up a hill. So it doesn't try to straighten out with the hill, which is very important.
Yeah. So what's up with why don't we see more, like vehicles like yours? Why don't we see more wheelchairs like yours? Why don't we see like the an actual rugged, with some chains on the tires, some snow tires, and
Well, hopefully you will if the Mobility Independence Foundation has its way. We're making progress. We've already upgraded the battery system. We've got a project for an open source design for the human interface device. You might call it a joystick and control. We have another engineer working on a open source motor controller, which is like the other half of the electronic system that it has to communicate with to make everything work. Hopefully, we will bring an option to the world where it can be built and provided and maintained benevolently without systems. And here's the thing. Somebody once told me that after the ACA, we went from over 250 equipment providers in this country down to less than 50.
wow,
As a libertarian, what happens when you reduce your options?
sure, yeah, less competition, and yeah, monopolies, yeah.
Yep. So there's a lot of lobbying that goes on. A lot of people fail to realize, and this is years ago metrics, but the medical equipment industry had a bigger, stronger hold on our government through lobbying than big pharma. So there's a lot of power there. And I'm a free market kind of guy, and I believe in capitalism. Before anybody, shouts at me for what I'm about to say, how dare you be anti-capitalist?
Yeah, let's go, commie. Come on, say what you're gonna say.
Right. I'm so communist that I want your auto mechanics and your engineering students and your high school tech classes to come together and build a wheelchair for somebody who wants to have a better life. That's how communist I am. So, intellectual property is a big problem. Most libertarians should be against the majority of it, particularly when it's for human benefit. Medications, right? The EpiPen thing. We're seeing that in the medical equipment field. I have seen power wheelchairs with faux suspension, fake suspension, springs mounted on the outside that don't actually actuate.
Just for show.
Yeah.
Just
think about that, right?
Yeah.
And most wheelchairs don't have a great suspension. This one has springs like a four-wheeler, and it has airbags, air ride, adjustable. They're not very costly. They come from other markets. In fact, most of the parts on this chair you can get off the shelf in some form or another that'll work. But if you got it through Medicaid or your insurance company, you had to use a provider. You might have to see a doctor, a therapist to justify the wheelchair. I went through some 20 plus appointments to justify the last time I applied for a wheelchair, and was given a range of wheelchairs that, well, if I used them, I'd end up injured and sent to the bed. And when you have a severe disability, going to the bed is a bad thing. That's where you die. So instead of taking that option, I took my meager limited income and I shopped eBay for parts. And I was keeping that chair kind of limping along and going. And I was about to buy a rear end assembly, right? Just the part of the frame that the rear wheel's attached to. But it was like $80, which is cheap because it's heat tempered steel, powder coated, pretty fancy stuff. And if you ever used apps where they show you one thing and they show you just a sliver of the next because they want you to swipe and look at it or trying to make it buy more.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, well, at that time, the eBay app did that. I haven't shopped on eBay since. And there was what appeared to be an entire Omega Track wheelchair. The wheelchair I needed, the one I'd had since I was 15. This would have been in 2019. And it was listed for like $4,500 plus shipping from Austin, Texas. And I made a joke. I know you got a comedic background, so you'll appreciate this. I took a screenshot of it, And, I'm a poor person. I don't expect to know people who have money. I don't expect other people to buy things for me or do anything. But I posted the screenshot of the chair and I said, if anybody has $4,500 plus shipping, this is what I want for my birthday, because it was like mid or late May. And my birthday is at the end of June. I'm turning 40.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you. Yeah, when in June? So.
Yep, June 24th. I'm hopefully going to be in Chicago for my birthday. So the next morning, my disabilities aide at the time, someone who comes in and helps me cook or clean the floors, which at that time, because I'd been in a defunct wheelchair for 5 years, my health was much more degraded than it is now. Right, an appropriate wheelchair, and my health bounced back. Right, you probably heard, use it or lose it.
Right.
That's true when you're in a wheelchair too. You still have to do things, believe it or not. Being able to get to the coffee table to get your prescriptions and your remote control to the TV so you have your cable, that's not a happy life, and that's not conducive to good health. And I see equipment like an appropriate wheelchair as a preventative health measure.
Sure.
So I made that joke. And my aide at the time, Bradley Pierce, who helped petition for this race, by the way, this year. He comes in, and of course, we're friends on Facebook, and he had seen it, and he's trying to convince me to crowdfund this wheelchair. And I had been crowdfunding for other people already for years. And at one point in 2011, a van was crowdfunded for me, an accessible van to get back and forth to the doctor. He had to try for days. And it's interesting because within literally the same 60 seconds of him starting that conversation, another friend of mine up the road sent me a message on my phone, also trying to convince me to crowdfund it. And within a few days, it worked. They convinced me. And here's the thing, Lou. You want to talk about the ineptitude of government? Let's talk about it. In New York at the time, it could take 2 years to get a wheelchair.
2 years.
If you needed a adapted or specialized or custom wheelchair, yes, which I do for obvious reasons. The chair, which was barely used, it had something like 16 hours of use on it. There's an hours counter.
So instead of an odometer, there's the hours there.
It was crowdfunded, shipped, delivered, and custom modified for my use in 2 months.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. That was a better result than the system ever gave me for anything. That wheelchair is sitting behind me. I'm currently sitting in another old Omega Tract, which also came up. I lied, I guess. I just realized. I bought this one on eBay. I slapped $5,400 on a credit card in a heartbeat when I saw it. It's got the air ride. It's got lights. It's got an air horn.
Holy shit! That horn just went off.
It's got, here's another feature that people don't realize is actually very important. I get accused of having a lazy boy on wheels, right? Looks so comfortable, Tom. It reclines.
Wow.
It tilts. It's just about every feature you would want in a lazy boy chair, right? What's the purpose of that? A lot of people don't understand. You probably know what a bedsore is.
Sure. Oh yeah, you got to keep moving. Yeah.
Right. So the purpose of that is to take weight off of where you're sitting. Believe it or not, if you've been sitting down for 40 years straight, that's an issue.
Yeah.
And so anybody who can't be ambulatory needs the ability to tilt and recline or otherwise get weight off. I do this twice a day for 10 to 15 minutes. And of course, when I sleep, but it makes it easier to move around. It makes it easier to get in and out of the chair. And this is another thing that happened, which is interesting. There was a man by the name of William Peace, Peace. He had a blog on the internet. His handle was Bad Cripple. He was a disabilities advocate, and he died of food, food sores, bed sores, advocating against the decline of wound care, which is bed sores, after the ACA.
Jeez.
Interesting fact about the ACA, you probably know this, but most people don't. 85% of that was written by Republicans in the 80s.
And this is the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one that covers you despite your pre-existing condition, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what it covered me for? Wheelchairs that would lead to my death, my long, slow, horrible death. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Tom, I was going to say, you know what you need on both your wheelchairs? You need to put an AR-15 on them. So on both.
So I don't actually need to put it on the wheelchair. I had one in 2020. I loved the thing. We got it down to 6 pounds. It was very accessible.
Nice.
So I now advocate. I don't allow myself to go over 2 people at a time. I tend to keep 2 people that I'm helping at a time, because if you stack too many cases on yourself, it's stressful.
Oh yeah.
Social workers have a higher rate of psychosis, suicide, severely high rate of rollover in the job field, because it's so hard. And social workers are near and dear to my heart. They deal. A lot of people don't understand this, so particularly in the disability realm. A social worker's job is to come out, get to know you, know your struggles, know your problems, understand your situation, file paperwork for the state. And more often than not, they have to come back and they have to tell this individual that they know, that they befriended, whose struggles they understand, that they can't help them, that they're not allowed to help them. One social worker that I know had a gentleman who was in hospice care at home. He was in his late 80s, and his hospital bed broke, and that was the only place he could sleep. And he got denied over and over again. And so she did actually a very libertarian thing. She found 4 brand new hospital beds that he could choose from, donated for free. And her job told her, you're not allowed to do that.
You're not allowed to be a human being.
Apparently, when she signed the contract for her job, she signed something that stated that she's not allowed to do anything that competes with Medicaid or Medicare. Think about that. Not allowed to compete.
Right.
Not allowed to help.
Yeah.
So this poor guy was sleeping on the floor, in a bad situation, in a lot of pain, because she's not allowed to compete with government sanctioned systems.
And Thomas, we're going to wrap things up in a little bit. And I just want you maybe just talk a little bit about the stuff that you're trying to do, not only as an advocate, but also, running for office as well. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that before we go.
Well, the number one reason that I run for office is to show people how easy it is. Well, think about it. I am disabled, on welfare, in the boondocks, and I found a way to run for state senate, in which I set a record for the Libertarian Party of New York. I made the ticket for U.S. Senate in 22, and I'm running for town supervisor this year. Does that mean that everyone should run for office? No. But it does mean that I get to go places, I get to do things, I build support, I network, and that's what I'm trying to teach people. If you have a disability, you can network, you can ask for help. Often enough, the number one thing to get people to wrap their heads around in order to help them in a disability situation is just convincing them that it's okay to ask for help. So I can tell you that there's at least a dozen candidates in New York alone, not necessarily disabled, I don't think any of them are, who ran for office just because they saw me doing it. Just because, look, that guy's doing it. I've got no excuse to not go after my passions with this. I've got no excuse to not go after helping my community, right? When you see the guy who's got the odds against him, I guess, I don't really think that way, um, doing something, you make that comparison to yourself in your own situation, right? So if I inspired people to get politically active, to pay attention to the politics, pay attention to their local politics, uh, that's great. There are other benefits to running for state senate or U.S. Senate. Um, the volunteers, right? Um, most political volunteers start out as young people, right? They need some kind of guidance. They need some kind of initiative. They need something to do that makes them feel productive. And, something we lack in our country today a lot is mentorship. And so a lot of my campaigns were about mentoring young people to understand the world better. And I'm very proud of a lot of those young people and what they've done and what they've gone on to do. One of the things I railed against as a state senate candidate was the fact that the office for those with disabilities in New York had been rearranged into nothing more than a piece of paper. Right? It was on the books, but they didn't do anything. And you can thank the Cuomos for that, both of them.
One of them you'd have to thank through a seance, I believe. So
yeah, well, I mean, give it time. So now they have actually reopened that office. I don't necessarily like all of the protocols and the way it functions, but there's at least some place to call now when you're getting abused in the systems. I've dealt with this across the country from Chicago to Missouri to Florida and Texas. Most states have some kind of office where if your disabilities aid or someone that works at the institution you're housed in is abusing you, you can call and they actually do something about it. There was a gentleman in Chicago area, very disabled, definitely on the poor side of Chicago, black, and his aide was telling him that if he didn't do what the aide said and take all of the abuse from the aide, that aide could have his welfare services removed. That's scary, Lou.
Yeah.
That's scary to someone in that situation. And it's also very untrue. I made one phone call, one, and his problem was solved. In New York, there isn't a place to call for that. Or at least there wasn't. Now there is. So messaging, pushing. I did something that libertarians don't really do enough. No discredit to those of you out there who do this when you run for office. But you have to actually contact, talk to, have discussions with, and sit down with seated representatives, even from political parties you can't stand. Because you get to have a conversation. You get to have an effect. And that's what it did.
Well, also, you need to know how things run if you want to actually affect, some change within the system. I got to tell you, Thomas, you may have me rolling cigarettes. We'll see.
Right. Make sure it's organic.
I gotta make sure it's the organic, but I have to get going, but I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and tell your story. And once again, is there where can people check out your stuff? Does the MIF, does that have a website and all that?
themyth.org, and we chose that name for the website deliberately. The Myth, right? We're pretty miffed about the way things are working.
Well, I was gonna say you're gonna have a bunch of people who misspell MILF and end up finding your site. So
look, only the people who already go to that website are going to go there. So it's themyth, MIF.org. You can learn about what we're doing. We're new. We have reached close to 150,000 in grants in our first 6 months, and we're 8 months old. And we're moving along. It seems like there is no end of people with expertise who care about this project, including those who work in the industry. I had a conversation with a guy who works for a provider. His job is to help you spec and obtain the equipment you need and keep them repaired. And I was talking about the issues, and he goes, "Let me guess, you're going to talk about," and he rattled off the company names, most of which I've sued in the past. Um, and you know, so the people that work in these systems, they know, they get it. The social workers, the people who work with the equipment, doctors, therapists, they all get it. They know how bad it is. They're just trying to do whatever good they can, whatever way they can. And I think we have real opportunity with going forward with open source designs that make them more durable. They're actually going to be more green. A cast iron pan is very green. You know why? It lasts forever. I'm using cast iron pans that my great grandparents inherited. These wheelchairs are very easily repairable. We believe that high school tech students can build one. We believe that college students can build one. We believe that mutual aid organizations that specialize in repairs can build one. We believe that your auto mechanic or your diesel mechanic can build one.
I'll tell you who can't build one. This guy.
I would disagree.
All right, that's the challenge. We might have to do a sequel and all that. But Thomas, thank you so much. Everyone out there, please check out themif.org and follow Thomas Queter. It's spelled Quiter at Twitter. And we're gonna end now. Thomas, thank you very much. Let me just end the broadcast.